Do Joel Eriksson, Kirill, Kaprizov, and Matt Boldy have a chance to be the best line in Minnesota Wild history? We'll take a look at some of the other candidates, an update on Brock Faber's Calder Trophy chase, Joel Eriksson, and is this Kirill Kaprizov's best work offensively? We discuss all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Wild. We are your team every day.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we give you an update on Joel Eriksson's status heading into tomorrow's game against the Anaheim Ducks. We will also take a look at some of the best trios all time in Minnesota Wild history. Are Joel Eriksson, Matt Boldy, and Kirill Kaprizov climbing up the list? We'll also talk about Kirill Kaprizov's body of work here this season and the run that he has been on over the last couple of months. Where does it rank amongst some of his best stretches of play throughout his career? My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, credentialed Wild media member. And right off the top, let's get to the update we were hoping to get from Michael Russo. And it finally came, and we finally have a definitive update as to where Joel Eriksson's status is currently at. According to Russo, sounds like Joel Eriksson will miss a few games, but the Wild center dodged a bullet. Means it could be Marat Huznadinov's NHL debut time tomorrow against the Ducks. Now, we're going to talk at length. We've got Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod already recorded tomorrow's episode, and so we are going to dive in fully tomorrow into how to replace Joel Eriksson in the lineup, what the line combination should look like, as well as trying to fill all of those holes, and talking about Marat Huznadinov in full view. So we'll have a full scope of all those updates for you coming up tomorrow. As for tonight's, I do want to give some love to the Wrecker line, which has been on an absolute tear over the last few weeks since that line was put together. In fact, they have been on just an insane run of play over these last. We're getting all the way up to the 16, 17 game mark since they were combined after the All-Star break. Their ranks amongst the NHL leaders. Kirill Kaprizov is currently second in the NHL in points in that span. 17 games, he's got 28 points, 14 goals, 14 assists. Joel Eriksson is 10th. He's got 21 points in the last 17 games, 8 goals, and 13 assists. And Matt Boldy is 16th in the NHL with 8 goals and 11 assists, 19 points in the last 17 games. And so that group by itself, they have shown a great tendency to be able to score at will. And so John Hines finally making the decision to go to that trio, something Dean Evason didn't last year or even the year previous, did not unite that group for the sake of trying to keep the lineup as deep as possible, giving you one or two lines that can make an impact. John Hines said, let's get all the best guys. Let's get our 3 best players on one line and just wreck people. And those 3 have been doing that since they were formed. And so as far as we go in Minnesota Wild history, just looking even at some of the best seasons in team history from a goals and a points perspective, we'll start obviously with the best statistical season in Minnesota Wild history, Kirill Kaprizov in 2021-2022. 47 goals, 61 assists, 108 total points. And the trio of Kaprizov, Ryan Hartman, and Matt Zuccarello, all 65-plus point players. Hartman and Kaprizov, 34-plus goals. Zuccarello had 24 goals himself. And so from a statistical standpoint, that line probably is tops in Wild history, at least from a production standpoint. But what do we know about Ryan Hartman? Hartman is somebody who is capable of stepping in and filling different spots in the lineup, but he's not a tried and true 1C. And Matt Zuccarello, as nearly had 80 points that season to go along with Kaprizov and Zuccarello. He slotted in as a second line guy, still top 6 in the seasons since. Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy are two young players. Kaprizov is entering his prime. You could argue he's in his prime right now. Matt Boldy still ascending as a young player, and Joel Eriksson has put together enough of a body of work that he is finally adding the offense to that mix in full here with himself on the brink of a 30-goal season and the opportunity for him to be around a 60-point player as a center that's taking a ton of face-offs and a ton of draws. So, it's statistically, it may be that 2021-2022 season, but I would say from a player perspective, from what the players are bringing to the table, this is probably more of a tried and true top players on your top line for what they have been able to do so far in their career. Another season with high outputs from a statistical standpoint was 2017-2018. You had Eric Stahl, who had 42 goals for the Minnesota Wild. You had Jason Zucker, who had 33. But beyond that, the next closest was Mikael Granlund, who had 21 goals for that Wild team. He wasn't a center, though. But in terms of scoring, that trio is still a little ways behind some of the other top trios in Wild history. Stahl was a 2C. Mikko Koivu, as we know from his career, always the number one center option for this team. But he was never a points guy. Koivu was more of a 10 to 14 to 15 goals a season and somewhere between 35 and 55 points throughout his career. So I think we can say Eriksson is a more well-rounded center than Mikko Koivu. Koivu may be better defensively, but I think Eriksson definitely more well-rounded than Mikko Koivu was, to say the least. So I don't think we can definitively say that 2017-2018 team stacks up to what we have seen from Kaprizov, Eriksson, and Boldy. Another example, 2014-2015. Zach Parise had 33 goals, which is a top 10 output in Minnesota Wild history. You had Thomas Vanek, 21 goals. Jason Pominville had 18. Mikko Koivu had 14. Nino Niederreiter also had 24 goals for the Wild that season. But those guys, again, just not quite able to. Those are good supporting cast type players, but they just didn't have that top end star power that Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson possesses. Now, if you go to 2005, 2006, You've got Brian Rolston. You've got Marian Gaborik. That is a good dynamic duo. Rolston had 34 goals, 79 assists. That dude had some insane seasons with the Wild. Played 3 years here, and he had 30-plus goals in each of them. Just had some insane seasons with Minnesota for a guy that came in to the organization. Gaborik had 38 goals that year, but then after that, you've got a drop-off, and Todd White and Wes Walls next in line with 19 goals apiece. So, and the original inspiration for this topic came from one of our regular viewers in our various videos. Mateo at MN Wild Talk tweeted out, is the Kaprizov, Eriksson, Boldy line the best trio in Minnesota Wild history? 54% say yes. 9% say no. 36% say need a bigger sample size. As far as what you're looking for from a top trio, it's probably a yes. Although I could hear the argument for needing to see more of it, but it is probably a yes. So they've been fantastic. Obviously, it will be key for the Wild to try to figure out a way to fill in for Joel Eriksson over these next couple of games, which, again, we'll talk about in full detail on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild with Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod. So, again, the big news, we'll sprinkle it in here throughout the show today. Joel Eriksson expected to miss a couple of games, but did not have any major injury, which is a great sigh of relief for the Minnesota Wild. And we'll break that down in more detail with Isha on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild. When we come back, we're going to check in on the Calder Trophy race because turns out things are getting heated between Wild fans and Blackhawks fans. So we will discuss as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Sleeper. The final 2 months of the season are underway, and you can still win big, whether your team is in the playoffs or in the playoff chase. You can still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. In order to win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Wild fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can win big. All you have to do is pick whether players like Matt Boldy, Kirill Kaprizov, Brock Faber, Marco Rossi will record more or less than their sleeper projections in key categories. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Today's episode of Locked on Wild also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder for you to make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our daily conversations. And make sure to tune into tomorrow's episode in which we'll break down the loss of Joel Eriksson a little more in full detail after getting the news here today that Eriksson is expected to miss a few games. How about the Calder Trophy chase currently going on amongst the current hopefuls, Mr. Connor Bedard, also Brock Faber, and Marco Rossi? And the reason I bring this up is because it seems like Chicago fans especially continue to just beleaguer the point. Somebody tweeted, in fact, after Bedard had a 5-point game. How many 5-point games does Brock Faber have to his credit? And obviously, the answer is none, because Brock Faber is a defenseman. And so as you look at these standings right now, statistically for rookies, Bedard is now up to 20 goals, 31 assists, 51 total points in 52 games played. So he came back after fracturing his jaw and has done nothing but score ever since he returned to the lineup. And so now that he has gotten to 20 goals and 50 points, it seems more and more likely that he is a shoo-in for the Calder Trophy. But it brings us back to this original argument, and this is what a lot of Wild fans have been continuing to point to, is, do you value the points more than the other production? Because you look at the plus-minus numbers, Connor Bedard is a minus 36. And upon further review, it's not as though these Chicago goalies are letting in just an insane amount of goals, are struggling to make even average saves. The Chicago Blackhawks goalies have been basically replacement level goalies this year. So goals saved above expected. They're not saving a ton above expected, but they're making the saves that an average level or replacement level goalie would make. So you can't pin a ton of that on the you can't pin a ton of that minus on the goalies. And he's started to have more of an impact on the power play, up to 18 power play points on the season, which leads all rookies in that category. But again, like I go back to the same arguments we've made all season. Is Bedard is giving you offense. He's giving you goals. He's giving you goals and points. He's not giving you a ton beyond that. He's winning less than 40% of his faceoffs. He does not play on the penalty kill. He does not give you really any impact defensively. And so, do you value a flashy point total, or do you value what the likes of a rookie defenseman who is at 38 points right now, is playing on the power play, is playing top power play minutes, he's playing top penalty kill minutes, he's playing 25 minutes per night on average throughout the course of a rookie season? He's in the top 10 in NHL in minutes for an individual player as a rookie. And so we see it here on a nightly basis. The minutes are just so much quality and importance too. This Wild team is in the thick of the playoff chase and are fighting tooth and nail every night to win games, to get themselves in position to make the postseason. Chicago was the first team eliminated from postseason contention this season. And so who's making the bigger impact? You take Connor Bedard off of Chicago's roster, they're still a bad team. They're not going to magically start winning games because of the fact that he came out of the lineup. But if you take Brock Faber off of this Minnesota Wild team, where does that put you? And since Bedard came into the lineup, or came back into the lineup, he has 5 goals and 13 assists. So he's got 18 points since he came back into the lineup on February 15th. Chicago has won 4 games in that span, but they have also lost 8. They're 4-8-2 since Bedard came back into the lineup. And he's been a minus basically every night. Basically every night that he plays, he has been a minus player. Whereas you look at what Brock Faber has done from a statistical standpoint over the last, in that same time span, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4. He's had 4 games in that same time span in which he has been a minus player, at least from a goals perspective. But look at the minute totals in those games as well. He played 26 minutes, 28 seconds against Buffalo, 25 minutes against Vancouver, 29 minutes against Winnipeg, 25 minutes against Edmonton, 24 minutes, just under 25 minutes against Seattle, against Carolina, 23 minutes on the button against Nashville, then 26-41 against St. Louis, 23-25 against San Jose, 25 minutes, 27 minutes, 26 minutes, 24 minutes, 30 seconds in those games. That's why it's an easy decision, honestly, for me, is you just are getting impact minutes every time Brock Faber goes out there. And every time he's out there, those minutes are impacting these games. And for Connor Bedard, a lot of, look at what he did against Washington. Didn't register any points. He was a -1 in 21 minutes against the Capitals. The last 2 games, he's had 8 points. So credit there. But that's against Arizona and Anaheim. He had no points and was a -3 against Colorado. He had 1 point, was a -2 against Columbus. And this is just going to be split down the middle between these two franchises. Chicago thinks we're insane because we are trying to hype up Brock Faber's Calder Trophy candidacy. And to be honest, that's all Chicago has to root for. That's all Chicago has to cheer for this season, is Brock Faber bringing home some level of hardware. That's it. That's all they've got. They won 1 game in February that Bedard played in. They beat Ottawa 3-2. They lost to Pittsburgh 4-1, Carolina 6-3, Philly 3-1, Winnipeg and Detroit 3-2 in overtime. Then they lost to Colorado 5-0. So there's not a lot to cheer for in Chicago, at least right now. The hope is that Bedard will be able to get them to where they're trying to go. But you want to talk about an impact rookie? There's one choice. There's one choice for me. There's a player that certainly has had highlight level goals, but there is another player that is making an impact every single time he's out on the ice. That's why it makes it an easy choice. I want to talk about what we're seeing from Kirill Kaprizov this season, because he has been on just an otherworldly tear. He's amongst the top 10 in the NHL in scoring over the last couple of months. And so we will take a look at where this stacks up compared to Kirill's other great seasons. That is coming up as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets. because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who is going to win it all and cut down the nets in April. If it were me, my suggestion would be to bet on the play-in games or pick one of the #1 seeds to score an easy first-round upset at the beginning of the schedule, so you have the $200 at your disposal for the rest of opening weekend, which is games literally as long as you're going to be awake every day from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Locked On. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder for you, we'll break down the Joel Eriksson news in full detail coming up on tomorrow's show with Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod. So if you are tuning in here tonight wondering why the heck haven't we discussed Joel Eriksson, it's because we recorded tomorrow's episode before the news came out. News came out as we were wrapping up. Thankfully, we had decided to cover it in pretty full detail. So leaving that one for tomorrow, and we'll talk heavy about how to replace Joel Eriksson in the lineup. I want to talk about Kirill Kaprizov here to finish, because Kaprizov, in the midst of what would be another stellar season for him, on pace right now for 73 games played, 41 goals, 50 assists, 91 total points. I put it out there for the YouTube community, asking if people thought he had a chance to get to the 50-goal plateau. He needs 17 goals in the final 16 games of the season to be able to get there. So there's tall odds for him to be able to do that. But if you look statistically at where Kirill checks in amongst the rest of the NHL, since the All-Star break in particular, in those 17 games, Kaprizov has 14 goals and 14 assists. The 14 goals are tied with Austin Matthews for most in the NHL. The 28 points is tied with Nathan MacKinnon for second in the NHL. Connor McDavid has scored 3 goals in the last 17 games. He also has 32 assists in that span. Dude is just a cheat code out there with the Avs or the Oilers. Just insane what he's been able to do. But if you back it out even further, like let's go back out to the start of January for Kaprizov. Kirill is 8th in the NHL in that span. In 25 games, he has 20 goals, which is number 5 actually in the NHL. He is behind Austin Matthews, Sam Reinhart, Nathan MacKinnon, and Zach Hyman are tied for 3rd with 22. Kaprizov is tied with Jonathan Marchessault for 4th at 20 goals in that span, which again, 20 goals in 25 games. As far as points go in that span, Kaprizov is 8th in the NHL with 39, again, in 25 games. And so you look at a slow start for Kaprizov, and if we even back it out a little further to the start of December, Kirill is 10th in the NHL in points. He has 26 goals, 27 assists, 53 points in the last 38 games that he's played. And so for as slow of a start as it was for Kirill, and if you take it from the end or the start of the season in October to the end of November, Kaprizov just did not look himself. He was at that point just 7 goals and 13 assists. He had 20 points in the 21 games, but it just didn't look like the same guy that we've seen over the last couple of seasons. And I'm going to give Denny some credit here because I think he has hit it right on the head. That injury that Kaprizov suffered against the Winnipeg Jets robbed him of his offseason. Because when you, as a player, get injured, you have to heal first. And so let's say it's a 2 or a 3 month recovery period. From a rest perspective, you are using that. So the Wild season got done at the end of April. May, June, July, you are resting. You're not able to do your standard off season to get yourself in position to gear up for the season. And so then everything was truncated into a very intense, obviously, few months of training to try to get himself ready. And he just was not the same guy at the start of the season. And so where does this rank amongst some of the other stretches we've seen from Kaprizov throughout the course of his career? If we go to 2021, 2022, when he had the 100-point outburst, his best stretch of games was March and April. Like if you go month by month for Kaprizov, in 2021, 2022, he went the entire month of October without a goal. He had 6 points in 8 October games. Then he had 7 goals in November and then 5 goals in December. So you flipped to 2022 and he was sitting on 12 goals and 24 assists, which that's not bad, but it's not what you would call like Kaprizov type numbers. Month of January, he had 6 goals, 10 assists. So much better stretch for him. In February, 6 goals, 5 assists, 11 total points. But then March and April was where he really took off. 14 goals in March, 6 assists, 20 total points. Then in April, he had 9 goals and 16 assists. So 23 goals, 22 assists in the final 2 months of the season. That is pretty impressive for Kaprizov, to say the least. And so in a span of 2 calendar months, 23 goals, 22 assists. Now, if we go to 2022, 2023, Kaprizov had to do much more of the heavy lifting because the offense wasn't as spread out. And he had to really be the one to will this team to wins, especially early on in the season. But was way more consistent until he got hurt against Winnipeg, and then came back sometime later to try to get himself back and ready for the postseason. So he missed a good chunk of games. He missed from March 8th to April 8th and just was not the same guy down the stretch. And so outside of that 2021, 2022 season, in those final few months, this is probably the best stretch that we have seen from Kirill Kaprizov in his NHL career, because he has done this now since the start of December is when he really started to turn the corner. And that's 53 points in 38 games. And so even though it's not his best statistical season, I think it's safe to say it's his best work. So he's a huge reason as to why this Wild team has continued to fight for a playoff spot. And they're going to need every ounce that he has at his disposal the rest of the way in order to make it happen. So that will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Again, just a reminder, we did record with Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod, and we'll be breaking down Brock Faber or Joel Eriksson X injury on tomorrow's show. Just we had a lot of good discussion there, and so I didn't want to have to get rid of that episode. So we're going to air it tomorrow, first thing in the morning. Now that we know, we'll break down how the Wild can try to replace. You're not going to be able to replace everything that he does, but they can try to, especially in tomorrow night's game against the Ducks. Make sure to hit the like button on this episode before you head out for the night, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. You can find all of our content on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, so make sure to tune in so you don't miss out on any news throughout the week on the Minnesota Wild. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.